Hello students, my name is Niyati Said and thanks for watching Edupedia word videos. My topic for the presentation is the fifth section of digestion and absorption chapter of 11th standard. So the topic of presentation is regulation of digestive system. Okay. The absorption is the process by which the end products of digestion pass through the intestinal mucosa into the blood or lymph. Okay, it is carried out by passive, active, or facilitated transport mechanism. A small amount of monosaccharides like glucose, amino acids, and some electrolytes like chloride ions are generally absorbed by simple diffusion process. Okay, the passage of these substances into the blood depends upon the concentration gradient. Okay, however, some of the substances like fructose and amino acids, they are absorbed with the help of the carrier ions, and this mechanism is called as facilitated transport. Okay, I'm just giving you the brief here, then we'll be explaining in detail. Okay, and transport of water depends upon the osmotic gradient. Active transport occurs against the concentration gradient and hence they require energy for this process. Okay, various nutrients like amino acid, monosaccharides like glucose, electrolytes like they are absorbed into the blood by this mechanism. Fatty acids and glycerol, they being insoluble, cannot be absorbed into the blood. They are first incorporated into small droplets called micelles, which they move into the intestinal mucosa. Okay, they are reformed into a very small protein coated fat globules called as chylomicrons, which are transported into the lymph vessels in the villi. Okay, now the digestive activities like gastric and intestinal secretions, they are controlled by the neural and hormonal mechanism. As you can see in this presentation, the sight, smell of the presence of the food in the buccal cavity, it stimulates the salivary secretions. Okay, gastric and intestinal mucosa, they secrete digestive hormones such as gastrin, secretin, cholecystokinin, vilcanin. Okay, there are about 4 important hormones and their effect on the target cells, which are following. First is gastrin. It is produced by enteroendocrine cells of the stomach mucosa. Okay, now what is its effect? Its effect include stimulation of gastric juice secretion by gastric glands. Second is the stimulation of smooth muscle contraction in the stomach, small intestine and large intestine, which increases gastric as well as intestinal motility. Okay, we have read 2 sphincters in the stomach. One was Fundic sphincter and another was pyrolic sphincter. So the relaxation of the pyrolic sphincter, that promotes gastric emptying into the small intestine. Okay, now the second hormone is a secretin, which is produced by the enteroendocrine cells of the duodenal mucosa. Now what are its effects? Its effects include, it stimulates bicarbonate secretion by the pancreas, okay, which stabilize the pH of the chyme when released into the duodenum. Okay, second effect includes the stimulation of bile production by the liver. Okay, as we know that liver, it produces bile, so it stimulates secretin. I'm talking about the secretin, that it stimulates the bile production by the liver. And the third, it inhibits gastric juice secretion and gastric motility, which in turn slows digestion in the stomach and thus it finally retards the gastric emptying. Okay, another third hormone is a cholecystokinin, that is CCK in short form. What is CCK? It is produced by the enteroendocrine cells of the duodenal mucosa, means the mucosal layer of the duodenum. Now, what are its effects? Effect includes stimulation of bile released by the gallbladder. Okay. Second, it stimulates pancreatic juice secretions, and the third, that it helps in the relaxation of the hepatopancreatic ampulla and opening of the hepatopancreatic sphincter, which allows the flow of bile and pancreatic juice into the duodenum. As we know that liver has a bile duct which opens into the duodenum, and liver is also connected with the pancreas also. Okay, so the hepatopancreatic ampulla, and thus it opens into the hepatopancreatic sphincter, means the gate, which allows the flow of the bile as well as pancreatic juice into the duodenum. Okay, so these were hormones and their effects on the target cells, okay, which involves the regulation of the digestive products. Now, the absorption of digestive product, as I have told you earlier, that absorption is the process by which the end products of the digestion passes through the intestinal mucosa, okay, into the blood or lymph, okay, into the blood or the lymph. It is carried out by passive, active or facilitated transport mechanism. A small amount of monosaccharides like glucose, amino acids and some electrolytes like chloride ions are generally absorbed by a simple diffusion process. The passage of these substances into the blood depends upon the concentration gradient. Okay. However, some of the substances like fructose and some amino acids are absorbed with the help of the carrier ions, and this mechanism is known as facilitated transport. I hope it's clear to all of you. Now, the transport of water, it depends upon the osmotic gradient. Active transport occurs against the concentration gradient, and hence it requires energy, okay, to move against the concentration gradient. Various nutrients like amino acids, monosaccharides like glucose, electrolytes, they are absorbed into the blood by this mechanism. Fatty acids and glycerol, being insoluble, cannot be absorbed into the blood. They are first incorporated into small droplets called micelles, which move into the intestinal mucosa. Now we'll see. First is passive transport. Okay. What is passive transport? As you can see that from the less concentration area they move to the more concentration area, then that is known as diffusion. Okay, and when they require carrier ions then for the transport, or they require channel, then that is known as facilitated diffusion. So this in all is known as passive transport. So the absorption of the nutrient from the higher concentrated region to the lower concentrated region without the expenditure of energy, it includes osmosis and diffusion. Osmosis means where absorption of water takes place, and diffusion where the absorption of the solute molecules takes place. Okay, am I clear? Now, the diffusion is of two types. One is simple diffusion, as we have just talked about it, and another is facilitated diffusion. Simple diffusion, what happens is molecules alone cannot be diffused. For example, absorption of vitamins, chloride, ions, etc. Whereas in facilitated diffusion, diffusion with the help of carrier ions like Na+, for example, absorption of fructose, mannose, etc. Okay. Now comes the active absorption or the active transport. That means it moves against the concentration gradient, and hence it requires energy for this process. Okay. Various nutrients like amino acids, monosaccharides like glucose, electrolytes, they all are absorbed into the blood by this mechanism. Okay, as you can see that it requires ATP to move against the concentration gradient. Okay, so the absorption of the nutrient from the lower concentration region to the higher concentrated region against the concentration gradient. Students, please don't forget to write against concentration gradient, because it is the main point of active transport. Hence, it requires energy. For example, absorption of amino acids, monosaccharides like glucose, electrolytes, etc. Okay. Now, before getting into the absorption of lipids, I would like to tell you the difference between facilitated diffusion and the active transport. Transport of solutes across cell membranes by protein carriers can occur in one of two ways, that is facilitated diffusion and active transport. Okay. The solute can move downhill from region of higher to the lower concentration, relying on the specificity of the protein carrier to pass through the membrane. This process is called as passive transport or facilitated diffusion, and it doesn't require energy. Okay. And the solute can move uphill from region of the lower to the higher concentration. This process is called as active transport, and it requires some form of chemical energy, that is ATP. Okay, as we have just compared both of them. Okay, now the transport process a cell uses depends on its specific needs. For example, red blood cells, RBC, they rely on the facilitated diffusion to move glucose across the membrane, whereas intestinal epithelial cells, they use active transport to take in glucose from the gut. And facilitated diffusion is effective for red blood cells because the concentration of glucose in the blood is stable and higher than the cellular concentration. On the other hand, active transport is needed in the gut because there are large fluctuations of glucose concentration as a result of eating. Okay, now we move forward towards absorption of lipids. Now comes the absorption of lipids. Fatty acids and glycerol, being insoluble, cannot be absorbed into the blood. They are first incorporated into a small droplets called micelles, okay, which move into the intestinal mucosa. They are reformed into very small protein-coated fat globules called chylomicrons, which are transported into the lymph vessels, which we call it as a lacteals in the villi. These lymph vessels, they ultimately release the absorbed substances into the blood stream. Okay, let's see it again. Monosaccharides and disaccharides and fatty acid, they cannot be absorbed directly as they were insoluble. Okay, and bile salts and the phospholipid, they convert them into a small spherical water droplets, which we call it as a micelles. Okay, they are reformed into a small protein coated fat globules, which we call it as a chylomicrons. They are transported into lacteals in the villi. These are the lacteals. Okay, from the lymph, chylomicrons enter the blood. As you can see that these are the fatty acids and the monoglycerides. They cannot be absorbed directly as they are transported into lacteals in the villi. These are the lacteals. Okay, from the lymph, chylomicrons enter the blood. As you can see that these are the fatty acids and the monoglycerides. They cannot be absorbed directly as they are water insoluble. So these got converted into an emulsion like substance. As we just told you that bile salts and the phospholipid, they convert fatty acids and monoglycerol into the spherical water soluble droplets called micelles. Okay, now this forms fatty acid and the monoglycerol, they result from the fat digestion. They leave the micelle and enter the epithelial cell. So now this is going to enter the epithelial cell. This has entered the epithelial cell, and this, as you can see, that this is a Golgi apparatus of a epithelial cell. So fatty acids, they link to form triglyceride here, and the fatty globules, they combine with the protein to form a chylomicron. As I just told you that they are reformed into a small protein coated fat globules, they are chylomicrons inside the Golgi apparatus. Okay, now the chylomicron are extruded from the epithelial cell and enter a lacteal. Okay, lacteal is you can say that it is a lymph capillary. As you can see that going or moving out from epithelial cells, it enters the lacteal, which is a lymph capillary. Okay, and lymph in the lacteal transports chylomicron away from the intestine. So I hope this is clear to all of you. Now moving forward to absorption in different parts of the alimentary canal. First is it takes place in different parts of the alimentary canal like mouth, stomach, small intestine and large intestine. However, maximum absorption occurs in the small intestine. Okay, now this is the summary of the absorption in the different parts of the digestive system. First is mouth. Okay, where certain drugs coming in contact with the mucosa of mouth and lower side of the tongue are absorbed into the blood capillaries lining them. Okay, and then comes the stomach, where absorption of the water, simple sugars and alcohol, they etc. take place. And then comes a small intestine. It is a principal organ for the absorption of nutrients. The digestion is completed here, and the final product of digestion, such as glucose, fructose, fatty acids, glycerol and amino acids, they are absorbed through the mucosa into the bloodstream and lymph. And then comes a large intestine, where the absorption of water and some mineral drugs, they take place. Okay, the absorbed substances, they finally reach the tissues, which utilize them for their activities. This process is called as assimilation. Okay, the digestive waste solidified into the coherent feces in the rectum initiate the neural reflex, causing an urge or the desire for the removal of the feces. The ejection of feces to the outside through the anal opening is known as defecation. Okay, it is a voluntary process and is carried out by the mass peristaltic movement also. Okay, now comes ileum. Ileum of a small intestine is a chief area of the absorption due to its great length, coiled structure and the presence of the villi, which increases the surface area of the absorption. Okay, as you can see, this is the villi. It increases the surface area of the absorption because it has microvilli in it. Okay, and these are the lacteal. This yellow line is a lacteal, which is a lymph capillary that helps in the absorption of the products of the fat digestion, and these red network linings, this is blood supply for the nourishment of the villi. Okay, so ileum of a small intestine is the chief area of absorption, or you can say that is a principal principal organ for the absorption of nutrients. Okay, the digestion is completed here in the small intestine, and the final products of the digestion, such as glucose, fructose, fatty acids, glycerol and amino acids, they are absorbed through the mucosa into the bloodstream and finally in the lymph. Okay, now the absorbed materials are then incorporated into the tissue for their activities. This is called as assimilation. The undigested substances like plant fiber, dead bacteria, they etc. form feces. It enters into the cecum through the ileocecal valve, which prevents the backflow of the feces. And feces temporarily stored in rectum, they are eliminated through the anus, and this is called as egestion. This entire process is known as defecation. Okay, as you can see, this is the vermiform appendix, this is the ascending colon. Okay, and this is the ileosacral sphincter. Okay, pressure and the chemical irritation, they relax sphincter and excite peristalsis movement. This is completely involuntary. Okay, and the pressure or the chemical irritation, it inhibits the peristalsis of the ileum and excites sphincter, and thus it enters here. And here, when it comes here, then the pressure of the chemical irritation relax sphincter and excite peristalsis. Okay, and the fluidity of the content promotes emptying of the entire ileosacral. Okay, and this entire process is known as defecation. Okay, now comes the disorders of the digestive system. The inflammation of intestinal tract is the most common ailment due to bacterial or viral infections. Okay, the infection are also caused by parasites of the intestine like tapeworm, roundworm, threadworm, hookworm or pinworm, etc. So the first disorder of the digestive intestine is a jaundice. Jaundice causes your skin and whites of your eye to turn yellow. Too much bilirubin causes jaundice. Bilirubin is a yellow chemical in hemoglobin, the substance that carries oxygen in your red blood cells. As red blood cells break down, your body builds new cells to replace them. The old ones are processed by the liver. If the liver cannot handle the blood cells as they break down, bilirubin builds up in the body and your skin may look yellow. Okay, many healthy babies have some jaundice during the first week of the life. It usually goes away. However, jaundice can happen at any age and may be a sign of a problem. Okay, jaundice can happen for many reasons such as blood diseases, genetic syndromes, liver diseases such as hepatitis or cirrhosis. Blockage of bile duct can also cause jaundice, infection, and sometimes medicine, they also cause jaundice. So jaundice is literally means yellow in French, and the yellowing of the skin and the white of the eyes for the backup of bile metabolic byproducts from the blood into the body tissue may result from the blockage of the ducts draining bile from the liver into the intestine or excessive breakdown of RBCs. Hemoglobin from destroyed RBC is broken down and in part it ends up in bile secretion. Here the skin and the eye turns yellow due to deposition of bile pigments. Okay. Now the second disorder is a vomiting. Vomiting it is also known as emesis. Okay. Emesis means the throwing up. Okay, throwing up. Among other terms is the involuntary forceful expulsion of the contents of one's stomach through the mouth and sometimes the nose. It is entirely controlled by the vomit center in the medulla oblongata, and the feeling of nausea precedes vomiting. Okay. Now comes the constipation. Constipation, it refers to the infrequent or the difficult passing of a stool. It is the most common digestive complaint, yet it is treated as a symptom and not as a disease by itself. Constipation may be interpreted differently by different people. Some refer to it as an infrequent bowel movement, while for others it is difficulty in passing a stool. Some people feel constipated if their bowel movement is incomplete, and in some cases constipation may accompany diarrhea, as in the case of irritable bowel syndrome. It is therefore essential that constipation be viewed from these different perspectives and treated accordingly. Okay. The frequency of the bowel movement among healthy people varies greatly, ranging from 3 movements a day to 3 times a week. If more than 3 days pass without bowel movement, the condition gains clinical significance. During such time, the intestinal content may harden up and a person may experience difficulty or even pain during defecation, means digestion. Okay. Constipation, it occurs among all ages from newborns to the elderly person. However, this condition is more common among the elderly. Women experience this problem more than men. Okay. The most common cause for constipation is a diet poor in fiber and low in fluid intake. There may be other causes as well as pregnancy, medications, lack of exercises, emotional stress, or even diseases. Colonic inertia and the pelvic floor dysfunction can also cause constipation. Even habit has a role to play, as ignoring the urge to pass a stool can also result in constipation. The affected individual may have urge to pass a stool, but it is unable to do so. This may result in discomfort and bloating feeling in the stomach pain or the cramps, headache, lethargy, and vomiting. If constipation accompanies loss of appetite, vomiting, cramps, rectal bleeding, or weight loss, it requires immediate medical attention. Okay. And this condition, in that you can just have Metamucil. Okay. Now comes the diarrhea. Diarrhea is a frequent passing of watery feces. Other symptoms like cramps and pain in the abdomen, nausea, vomiting, and these are the most common cause is an infection of the intestine, such as gastrointestinal enteritis or the food poisoning. Diarrhea can be dangerous for babies and young children. Okay. Food nutrients, they are absorbed in the small intestine. The waste is pushed into the large intestine where water is removed. The resulting feces is stored temporarily within the rectum, then passed out of the body through the anus. Feces, they are usually firm, moist, or easy to pass. Diarrhea is the frequent passing of loose, watery, or unformed feces. Acute diarrhea is the sudden onset of 3 or more loose stools per day, lasting less than 14 days. The most common cause of acute diarrhea is an infection of the intestine, such as gastroenteritis or food poisoning. Viruses, they are responsible for most cases. Okay. Now, what are the symptoms of diarrhea? Abdominal cramp, abdominal pain, urgency to go to the toilet, nausea, vomiting, and frequent passing of loose or watery feces. In that case, you can have this anti-diarrheal caplets. Okay. Now comes indigestion. Indigestion is a complete leading to the feeling of fullness due to improper digestion. It is due to anxiety, inadequate enzyme secretion, food poisoning, spicy food, etc. Okay, acid form in the stomach, it backs up into the esophagus, and this causes indigestion. Okay. And now comes the appendicitis. as you can see that this is the ascending colon, and this is the vermiform appendix. So the inflammation of the appendix due to infection is known as appendicitis. Common treatment is the removal of the appendix via surgery. And then comes anorexia nervosa. This is a psychological condition where an individual thinks they appear overweight and it refuses to eat. It weighs about 85% or less than what is developmentally expected for age and height. This is commonly seen in models or the young girls. They do not begin to menstruate at the appropriate age. Okay. And then comes digestive homeostasis disorder, which is a gallstone. Gallstone, it is an accumulation of hardened cholesterol or calcium deposits in the gallbladder. It can either be passed or surgically removed. Okay, in 4 out of 5 cases, excess cholesterol crystallizes and grows to form a stone, and 1 in every 5 gallstones is formed from excess levels of bilirubin. Okay. You can even help your digestive system by drinking water and eating a healthy food that includes high fiber foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains. Make it easier for poop to pass through your system. The digestive system is a pretty important part of your body. Without it, you couldn't get the nutrients you need to grow properly and stay healthy. Okay, and next time you sit down to lunch, you'll know where your food goes from start to finish. So this comes to an end. Thank you and stay tuned.